Alright, so this is your second video for week 1 of quarter 4. Alright, and we're still talking about functions. So again, this is still week 1. And we're discussing functions, right? So here we're in Algebra 2. Right? Unit 1, Chapter 1. Okay? So we went ahead, we talked about functions. We discussed domain, range, function notation. We talked about interval notation as well as set builder notation for describing domain and range. And we talked about x-intercepts and y-intercepts. Okay? Today we're going to talk about some other things. We're going to review slope, right? And then we're going to discuss intervals that are positive and negative, and intervals that are increasing and decreasing, and finally average rate of change, which has to do with slope. So slope, just to recap what you learned from Algebra 1, slope, we use m as that variable, right? And there's a formula here, right? We go ahead and do y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. It can also be defined as rise over run, right? Or my personal favorite, delta x over delta y. I'm sorry, delta y over delta x. That's embarrassing. Delta y over delta x. All right. Good. So here, if I give you an ordered pair or two, right, I tell you, hey, we've got negative 3, 7, right? And then maybe we've got the point 2, 4. And I want to figure out the slope. I'm going to start by subtracting the y values. My two y values are 7 and 4. Now, it doesn't matter which one goes first as long as I'm consistent. I'm going to start with the 7. So I do 7 minus 4. Now, because I started with the 7, that means I need to start with the negative 3 for my x's, right? So here I'll do negative 3 minus 2. Had I started with the 4 up top, I would have had to start with the 2 on the bottom. Still gives you the same answer. So now 7 minus 4 is 3. Negative 3 minus 2 is negative 5. And then we always want that negative sign to be up top, so we get negative 3/5. All right, so there's our slope from two ordered pairs. All right. Now slope is a rate of change by definition. So we're going to take a look at average rate of change today. Okay. And we're going to do that using some interval notation as well as our formula for slope. All right. Now the other things I told you we're going to talk about intervals, right, where a function is positive. So positive simply means above the x-axis. All right. So when we look at a graph, we're actually talking about which inputs will give me outputs that are positive, right? So which values of x make y positive, right? Same thing with negative. Which values of x make y negative, right? Or it's going to be below the x-axis. So here for negative, we're asking where is that function below the x-axis? All right. Now increasing and decreasing are similar as well, right? Again, if we know the function, we just want to know the inputs, right? So which inputs give me a positive output? Which inputs give me a negative output? And here we're going to do the same thing, right? For increasing, we want to know for which inputs is the slope positive, right? Because that's where the graph is increasing. Or for which inputs is the slope negative. All right. So that's what we're going to be taking a look at today using graphs. And again, if you get an equation, you can always type it in your Desmos calculator, take a look at the graph, and pick up these key features. All right. So let's go ahead and dive into an example. All right. So here I've got this beautiful function here, right? Piecewise function. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. Let's go ahead and take a look at these one by one. Quick review. Domain. So here when I look at domain, it looks like I go from negative 4 to positive 4, and I'm including all those points, right? So I'm going to use interval notation here, right? And we'll go ahead and say that the interval goes from, that's not included, negative 4, to an included positive 4, right? Now my range, go ahead and take a look at my range. Okay. It looks like we're going from down there to up here, and both of these are included. So it looks like I'm going as low as negative 1, and I'm going all the way up to positive 3. So negative 1 to positive 3. So there's my domain, there's my range. Okay. All right, sorry, I had a little freezing issue there, so I'm back now. We're going to pick up what we were just talking about. Now we're going to take a look at our x-intercepts. Right? So here our x-intercepts are just where it touches the x-axis. So if I look here on my graph, -3, -1, and 4. Now remember, each of these is an ordered pair, not to be confused with an interval. So my ordered pairs are going to be -3, 0, because it's the value of x that makes y equal 0. -1, 0. And then finally, +4, 0. And you'll see I just separated those by commas, and that's perfectly acceptable. Now the y-intercept, there should be only one y-intercept, right? So here, our y-intercept, if it's truly a function, there should only be one. Here's where it touches the y-axis. And again, as an ordered pair, I know that the x value has to be 0 because it's what value I get for y when I plug 0 in for x. So the value of y when x equals 0. I can see when x equals 0, y equals 1. All right, so there's my y-intercept. Okay. Again, I'm going to go ahead and just clean up my graph and hope that my computer doesn't freeze. So here, just erase those one at a time. All right. Now we're ready to talk about this idea of intervals. All right. Now again, these intervals, I only want to know the x inputs. What x inputs make this happen? So here for number 8, intervals where the graph is positive. So where is my graph positive? Well, if I take a look here at my graph, I'm above the x-axis from here until I get to -3, one of my x-intercepts. From here, -1, I start getting positive again, all the way up until I reach 4, which again you'll notice are also x-intercepts. So here I only want to describe the inputs. So if I'm looking at my x-axis, it's this part with an open circle. Now here at -3, it is 0. 0 is not positive, so that is also an open circle. Same thing here, at -1 is 0. 0 is not positive, so open circle. And at 4, it's at 0, so again, open circle. So these are the intervals I'm talking about. So if I take a look here, it looks like my interval has two parts. It goes from -4, not including -4 because that's undefined, to -3, also not included because that's 0. And then it picks up positive again. I'm just going to put a comma. Picks up positive again at -1 until it reaches +4. So those are the intervals on which my graph is positive. -4 to -3 and -1 to 4. Okay, and this is how I write it. I just separate them by commas. Some people use a union symbol. Okay, so you can go ahead and write it also with a union symbol if you prefer. Okay?
What?
Now the next thing we're going to take a look at is the interval where the graph is decreasing. Okay? So the interval where the graph is decreasing, now we're taking a look at slope. Okay, so I want to take a look. Where is my slope going down? Okay, so if I start to investigate again, my graph from left to right is going down. It looks like on this interval right here. Right? And then here I get a sharp turn, so that's not included. And then again, it doesn't start to go down again until I get here, and it goes down. Okay? And then here, this time it's actually going to include, I believe, the endpoint, 0.4. Okay? So if we take a look at this one, right, we squish it down to the x-axis, open circle here at -4, open circle at -2. All those inputs give me a slope that's negative. And then here from 2 to 4, and 4 is included, those all give me a negative slope. Okay, so here I'm going to go ahead. Intervals where the graph is decreasing. Okay, so I can see from -4 to -2, my graph is going down. And then from +2 to +4, included, my graph is going down. Okay, so there's my interval where the graph is decreasing. And then finally, interval where the graph is increasing. We go ahead here, take a look. Again, this is going to be an open circle here, and all the points in between. So this, open circle, here we go. It's going to be all those points. So essentially, the rest of the domain is where it's increasing, right? So from -2 to +2. Okay, so those are my intervals of increase and decrease. All right. Next thing we're going to take a look at, the last thing is the rate of change on the interval -1 to 4. The average rate of change on the interval from -1 to 4. All right, now I got a lot going on here, so let's just go ahead and erase a little bit of it. A little bit at a time so my app doesn't freeze up. Okay. So here what we're going to do is it's telling me on the interval from -1 to 4. So my inputs are -1 and 4. So these are my 2 points. And essentially what I'm going to do is I'm going to connect those 2 points with a straight line. I'm going to ask myself, what is the slope of that line? Now this one's pretty easy. What is the slope of the line on the interval from -1 to 4? Well, it's perfectly flat. So here, the rate of change equals 0. Okay? So pretty straightforward rate of change. All right. Here's another example. I just want to do a second example where we're taking a look at that rate of change. I think you guys are pretty good on the intervals with the positive and negative. Now here, this one says rate of change of -1 to 4, but I don't really like that. So what we're going to do is we're going to do the rate of change, and let's go from -2 to 1. So on the interval from -2 to 1. So if I go to my function, right, at -2, I'm right here. And at 1, I'm right here. So I'm going to connect those. I'm going to figure out the slope. Now I can either read the ordered pairs, right? I can say here, hey, this point is 1, -5. And this point over here is -2, -8. And I can use my slope formula, right? -5 minus -8 over 1 minus -2. Now careful here, minus a negative becomes plus a positive. So -5 plus 8 is 3. Minus negative becomes plus a positive. 1 plus 2 is 3. 3 divided by 3 is 1. So my rate of change is 1 here. I also could have read that by looking at my graph and doing rise over run. So here, I'm rising 1, 2, 3. I'm running over 1, 2, 3. Left to right, it's going up, so it's positive 3 over 3 or 1. So I get the same thing. All right? So again, hopefully you guys are able to understand this idea of intervals of increase and decrease. They're simply the inputs that either give me y values that are positive, y values that are negative, or the inputs that give me a positive slope or a negative slope, the line going up or the line going down. All right? If you have questions, please email me.